this back in the day, but a large digital transformation for its e-commerce business. And I was asked to augment a new product management team at the Gap. And as a consultant, I had never come across that role before. So I asked my manager, I'm like, well, what is product management? And they said, oh, you'll figure it out.
That is Kris Harrison, Director of Product Management over here at Salesforce for Enterprise APIs and External Services. I'm Josh Burke, your host for the Salesforce Developer Podcast. And here on the podcast, you'll hear stories and insights from developers for developers. There, Kris is describing his relatively abrupt transition from consultant to product manager while working with the Gap. There, he also led a charge to think about services that can be called from multiple customer touchpoints instead of standalone website features.
So at the Gap, a lot of my projects were more customer-facing features on a website or on a content management tool. But I became ever more interested in the back-end capabilities that enabled those customer-facing features.
Mm-hmm.
And so I gradually took on more technical projects, more back-end focused projects. And eventually that led to, contributing to the company's burgeoning public API program, where the underpinnings of these customer-facing features were the product unto themselves. And so that directed my domain focus towards APIs. And I had that itch again to be able to be connected to customer problems that were of different industries. I had been in retail for a long time in e-commerce, and I was curious about new problems to try to solve. And Salesforce is in the mix of many, many different company and industry problems of various sizes. And so that opportunity to sort of reconnect with, more diverse problems was appealing to me at that stage of my career. So an opportunity to join the company's enterprise API team came my way. And I joined in June of 2019, and I've been here ever since.
Gotcha. And to level set, what specifically are you the PM for?
So I'm the product manager for a few different teams within our platform services area. The first is called the Enterprise API team, and we oversee the SOAP, the bulk, and the REST APIs that enable access to that core data in Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, and a few other clouds. But I'm also the PM for our external services product, which allows for the registration of non-core APIs, REST APIs, to expose them out as declarative building blocks in products like Flow. And so I'm on both the API production side of the house as well as the API consumption side of the house in my role within platform services.
And I'm going to guess that is beneficial because you get to see both sides of the fence, so you kind of know what gaps external services might be filling from a customer point of view versus what the REST or the bulk API might be doing.
Yeah, I mean, the neat thing about external services is that we need to reckon with the ongoing evolution of API standards and how different companies are expressing their API through that standard. Even though there's a specification, there's a lot of, variability or fluidity that we need to be able to reckon with on the Salesforce platform in order to expose those operations and those schemas out to be made use of through callouts to those APIs. So it's neat to be able to expose to what other developers, other companies are doing with their API and match that up with the best practices or the standards that we hold ourselves to for our own API. So it's a really neat place to be.
Nice. And I just have to give you a shout out because external services have come up multiple times. This is a developer podcast, but yet it is so convenient. The episode that is about to come out as we're recording this with Richard Clark, talking about Slack integrations, Narendra Singh using it with Flow. And then, of course, when I was talking to Tony about, open APIs and how things like Swagger really kind of benefit from that kind of stuff. So it's clearly, even for the developer audience, obviously being really useful. Okay, so I ask every PM this, partially because I always get a different answer. So, this is a fuzzy question. I say day in the life, but maybe a week in the life is a better way to put it. So, but what is a day in the life like for a Salesforce PM?
Oh, man. Well, for me, I'm working with two engineering teams. And so what's common is, the Agile practices to continue to drive forward on the scope that the teams are charged with. And that's a mix of, the user stories that enable the key features that we're targeting for a particular release, the bugs that we need to address in order to continue to support customer success, and also, participate in, high severity support cases that make their way to the engineering team, for which the support organization needs additional help to uncover the root cause and the path forward. So there's always that mix of activity going on. But as a PM, given the core Salesforce release cycle, you're always spending time on the release that's currently in development, while also, supporting the rollout of the current release and getting the word out, and working with marketing to make sure that the new capabilities are well understood and able to be adopted. And then there's another release we're going to have to start working on in a few months. So I need to make sure that my roadmap is up to date, and the things that I'd like to address in a future release are lined up, so that the team is always being kept up to date with the highest priorities, and that those priorities are well understood and are actionable by the engineers, because their time is so very precious.
Yeah. The phrase I think I keep hearing is move fast and don't break anything.
Yeah. I mean, don't break anything in production. But we can break things in pre-prod while we're developing. Nice. Bugs are good until they get out to production.
They're good as a learning exercise. Got it. Okay, so speaking broadly, and I think you touched on that a little bit when you're talking about, where the balance between consumption and creation with the APIs. And I don't think developers think about this that much, because they are kind of the consumer of the API. But what are characteristics that you would attribute to a good API?
That's a good question. So that was actually something that I draw upon from my days working on customer-facing features and solutions, which is it should be easy to understand. It should be usable. The core tenets of a product, be it software or hard good, are that it needs to be usable. It needs to be friendly to the end consumer. There need to be well understood affordances and good experiences that emanate or are resonant with that product. So the same core tenets that apply to a cup or a phone or a computer should be adhered to for an API. So I think just not thinking about it in such a super special or technical way is important to keep in mind. And what helps, ensure that in the case of APIs are these specifications that serve as guides to make the capability, the shape, the interaction with that API something that you don't have to relearn from company to company or from platform to platform. And that what the API is known for is the unique domain capability that your business is known for to be, consistently or usably expressed through that API.
And flipping that around a little bit, what are some things that developers should be considering to really use an API, especially an API like ours, like the REST API, effectively?
One of the things that I've tried to espouse back when we were doing conferences was to think about your use case, and for an API as extensive in capability and reach as Salesforce's, to not jump into the first resource that you connect with, to be able to appreciate how many options there are at your disposal, and that you really need to connect with the right API for the job that's at hand. And there are a lot of different ways to address a given use case through our API, which is great and awesome. But the burden does fall on the consumer, the developer, to be able to sort of future-proof their integration and make sure that they've evaluated the other options at their disposal. And the company, I think, is doing a great job at getting more tools, getting more resources out there in order to be more effective and efficient at navigating this large API surface.
Yeah, back when we were doing things like conferences and traveling, and I would talk to people less than 6 feet away from me, one of the things that I think it's improved, but and I know that we're crossing domains a little bit here, but one of the tricks on our platform that always surprised me that many developers did not expose themselves to was Apex REST. And it's like the number of times people just sort of assume the REST API, hit the API, get some stuff, keep hitting the API for these very like little bits of actions at a time. But we've got some modern tools to help with that as well. For instance, like what's a composite graph and how can that help developers be more effective and efficient?
Yeah, the Composite Graph API is the most recent addition to the Composite family of REST resources. And it's purpose-built to allow a developer to organize a large set of related S objects into a graph, and really eliminate the need to have to write extra code to orchestrate the relationships amongst those records, and develop a well-structured payload of relationships and operations that can be sent to the server, and then we'll figure out the most efficient way to process that payload and do so with the confidence that any issues that are encountered along the way won't result in an incomplete or partial transaction. And so we've studied a number of usage patterns with the existing composite resources. And as you made mention, Apex REST offers a lot of capability and customization, but that does entail, writing code. And so we found that Composite Graph is well suited to, really focus on the unique nature of the integration and not having to repeat these orchestration patterns over and over and over again.
Yeah, because I used to fall into that pattern of, write a data structure as an inner Apex class, sync that up to JSON, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like there's a little bit of business logic involved, but a lot of it is just handling those relationships. And it sounds like a composite graph can really replace something like that.
That is the motivation. And it's something that we reckon with, internally as different teams are building new features on the platform. But given our purview as, enabling capabilities on the platform for all developers, we recognize that opportunity exists for other teams to make use of outside the company. So
Gotcha.
we're drinking our own composite graph champagne while also pouring it out for everybody else.
Nice. What's the current state of the Composite Graph API, and what's the roadmap looking like?
So Composite Graph went GA in the winter 21 release, and it was demoed in a few different forums last year at TDX and a little bit more during Release Readiness Live. And so it's available for synchronous operations. The graph payload is something that we believe can be submitted to Bulk API 2.0 for asynchronous operations at a larger scale. And that remains in a closed pilot. So if anyone's interested to try that out, reach out to your account team and ask them to nominate you for the pilot. But we believe that there's a use case or a set of use cases that can be satisfied with the graph payload through Bulk as well. So that's something that we'd like to do in a coming release. But we want to gather a little bit more feedback through the pilot before we push that to GA.
Got it. So another thing that just went GA is the fields functionality for SOQL. What's the elevator pitch for that?
So the problem we're trying to solve with the fields function in SOQL is to make it simpler and more straightforward to explore the data in an org without having to do a bunch of research or to type out a long, extensive, involved query statement. And we believe this is the beginning of a capability within the SOQL language that will lend itself to reuse of other platform constructs that organize sets of fields for other purposes. So we went out the door in the last release with a pretty simple set of options of all, custom, and standard. And we believe that there are a lot more opportunities to add to that list of fields options in future releases.
So let's dig into that a little bit. So for instance, select all sounds a lot to me like select star, but what are some of the distinctions, and why not just go like a select star route?
Extensibility. Okay. Select star is a well-known pattern in other query languages, but we believe that we can do better and more in just establishing query language parity. So there are some situations where all the data, all the fields are of interest for a particular use case, but that's something that needs to be very cautiously developed against
right
in an integration with the platform, because there's a lot of resources that would need to be drawn from in order to retrieve and work with that kind of payload. So if you need all data, you've got a cheap and cheerful option. Well, not cheap, but you've got to, depending on your perspective.
Right.
But caution need be taken to ensure that that kind of use is an anti-pattern that would put the integration at risk. But if you're writing some queries while you're managing your org and you want to see the data model in the context of the data itself, this is a pretty handy tool for that.
So back in the day, people would, especially back my workshop days, people would always ask me like, why can't we use select star? My diplomatic response was something along the lines of, if we offered select star, then everybody would just kind of use select star to always get all the fields. And eventually in a multi-tenant system, that's just going to kind of break down performance. So is that statement no longer true in a select all world? Or are we putting in like limits and guardrails to make sure that you're not burning down your neighbor's house by using select all in, as you were just saying, in an anti-pattern situation?
There are absolutely limits in place, and they're well documented in our developer guide.
Okay.
So with great power comes great responsibility, but also launching this feature, we want to get feedback on the specific applications of it and learn about the degree to which these governor limits initially out the door are enabling or holding back the use. So
Got it.
we can evolve, and we plan to evolve from this initial posture in our spring GA and go from there.
Nice. And looking at the documentation and in your blog post, I think it's hard to visualize on a podcast how much simpler queries turn at this point, because the number of times, like, I do need all the standard fields, but I also want this one custom field, or often vice versa, because the only things that are interesting to me on that object, especially a custom object, maybe the custom fields that I just added to it, right? And it's like, that's like 12 characters now, instead of like, every single field being put down into a common delimited list.
That I'm glad that it resonates with you.
That being the goal. Speaking of character limits, we recently upped the SOQL limit from 25,000 to 100,000. What was the impetus for that?
There was room to grow
Okay.
with some of the underlying database constraints. And, as the platform, as more is asked of the platform, some of these limits are always up for reevaluation. And the current limit was just holding back some more interesting use cases and scenarios. And so we took a look at what the database could do. There was room to grow. And so we expanded that limit. So, limits are we talk about limits a lot.
We do, yes.
And why they're in place and why they're important, but they're not static. They're under ongoing evaluation by the teams that have them within their purview. And that's especially true with our enterprise API team and on the external services team to, expand or relax or evolve the nature of those limits as we move forward. So yes, we did that with SOQL character limit. It's on the other end of the spectrum with what Fields allows for, but the combination of the two can really open up a lot of interesting query patterns as is needed. With API request limits, we transitioned to a usage-based entitlement last year that allows orgs to actually exceed their daily allocation when there are spikes or unexpected usage patterns that come up that would otherwise just outright be blocked. And we recognize that that's not good for integrations that are peaking or have evolving usage patterns, and we could do better. So we did.
Yeah. And that's a brilliant one, because there's so many developers I know of who have run into that just out of pure, kismet. Like it wasn't a design flaw. They're not like trying to beat on the server or anything like that. And the number of times I've been in a hackathon and I've had to go ask a PM to please take this DE org and flip the 24-hour limit again thing. That's so that's a brilliant perspective. Kind of looking behind us a little bit here, it looks like we have some version retirements coming up. And first of all, I feel like retiring anything at Salesforce, any feature, any API version, anything is kind of a big deal, because we're potentially impacting a large number of enterprises. What goes into the consideration for a move like this?
There's a few things. Number one, we look at the consumption pattern. So there's definitely a longer tail of usage for our older API versions. The API version retirement program that is about to reach its next major milestone is affecting versions 7 through 20 of SOAP, Bulk, and REST. And version 7 went live during the summer 06 release. That's quite a long time ago.
Yeah.
And there are some orgs that are still making use of it, but the majority of orgs are on much more recent versions. And it's not for free. There's cost associated with maintaining those older versions, and we would much rather direct our resources towards building new features than keeping up really old versions that are not as feature rich as the more current ones. But we're also managing through this very thoughtfully and carefully, making sure that the retirement efforts are well understood, well communicated. We're making use of new features that launch within setup, like release updates, so that this retirement is within the same level of visibility as other changes to an org. We're also using this as an occasion to provide more and better insight into the API consumption of an org. So in summer 21, there'll be additional insights that can be gleaned of API requests coming into an org that will be in support of this retirement program, but also more generally just getting a better handle on who's making requests of which API, which version, what kind of operation, to better manage what goes on in an org.
Got it. And so one milestone's happening in summer 21. What's happening in summer 22?
So in summer 22, we will stop version 7 through 20 from being accessed, and we'll stop support for versions 21 through 30. So we're going into a very gradual retirement phase where the first milestone in a summer release is end of support, and that following summer will result in the end of the access, the end of life of that version or those versions. So it's a pretty long lead time, but it's meant to help support any migrations that need to happen to adopt the more current versions.
And so in that far off future where I have my 2006 version 7, I'm trying to think of what I would have used a 2006 integration with. Probably Flex. I don't even want to admit to that right now. So, but anyway, if I have that integration and I have neglected all warnings and kind of boldly gone ahead without doing anything, what am I going to see when my implementation is no longer going to be able to access API 7?
You'll get an error. You'll get an error response.
What's in that error response to let me know what I've done wrong?
It'll be a error code that indicates the resource or the operation is gone, and no longer available.
Got it. Okay. And to be clear, and I just as rounding it out, this is everything like this. So if it's data loader, third-party integration, anything that's pinging that endpoint is going to be impacted by this.
That's right.
So where can people go to learn more about this? I think we've got some help docs on it. Is there any other documentation on like migration advice or anything like that?
Yeah, the best resource is the knowledge article that represents each of the 2 retirement programs that are in flight right now.
Okay.
And they're both, well, the first one is able to be accessed from setup, from release updates. So don't even need to wait for the show notes. We can get to it right away from setup.
Got it. Nice. Okay, so instead of looking behind, let's look ahead a little bit. And you've mentioned a little bit here and there, but is there anything else from the roadmap that, again, safe harbor, forward-looking statement, asterisk, theoretical, et cetera, but anything that you're thinking about that you want to give a shout out to?
I want to give a shout out to some work that other teams within the company are doing with respect to GraphQL. So we talked about Composite Graph, which is a very, Salesforce S-object oriented organization of records for CRUD. But there's also energy going towards GraphQL, which is a query and data manipulation language and API specification that is supported with a suite of open source tooling that allows you to operate over a specific single endpoint. This is an API that Salesforce is exploring. There's some developer previews that are ongoing, and the team's starting to recruit other developers to participate in those previews to get some feedback and understand how well it's working before we open it up for more public access.
Got it. And that's our show. Now, before we go, I did ask after Kris's favorite non-technical hobby. And again, turns out to be something that's kind of a favorite among coders.
Learning to play the piano. I've been taking lessons for a few years now, and I find that it is a really wonderful way to learn the language of music, not unlike a programming language, but just a very different set of rules and applications that connect with through a different kind of keyboard. So that's been my hobby, and it's almost like meditation almost, because you can't really think about anything else when you're practicing music. So it's a nice little escape and a good hobby.
I want to thank Kris for the great conversation and information. And as always, I want to thank you for listening. We'll have more information about what Kris is talking about in the show notes. And speaking of show notes, if you would like to learn more about this show, head on over to developer.salesforce.com/podcast, where you can hear old episodes, see those show notes, and have links to your favorite podcast service. If you'd like to learn more about me, I am on Twitter at Josh Burke, and I am also on Twitch at Josh Burke, where we do a weekly Fortnite charity game. Hey, thanks for listening again, and I'll talk to you next week.